My name is Sreechand. I come from Arghyam. Arghyam is a philanthropy that works on groundwater resources, largely in rural India. We support non-profits, NGOs, collectives that work on improving access to water and improving groundwater resources in rural India. Um, yeah, so I want to start off by talking about how digital commons and common pool resources, we're in a place where we're working on both, right? We're trying to build platforms to govern and to take care of resources that are also common pool resources. So it's kind of very important for us to understand the platforms we build, the way they govern, also shape the kind of resources and the safety and security of the resources that we work on. Starting off with that, I kind of want to talk about a bunch of points here. So I'll start off talking about the different experiments and platforms we've initially built, what we've learned, and what our current perspective is. Arghyam is been fortunate to be at the vantage point of understanding how nonprofits understand community building, understand building technology platforms, because we've been a grant-making organization in the water space in India for over 15 years now. Our initial set of platforms that we've built them with the focus of having a single platform developer, platform manager, and different stakeholders that are maintaining and using it. Our first data platform we built that on an open source platform. We used ODK, and we at Arghyam as a philanthropy, we held the platform. So our partners, which are our grant making organizations, they used them, and then they help villagers adopt these. Very quickly we realized that at the scale that India is, in terms of context, in terms of how habitations and villages are differently classified, it does not work for us to hold it. We moved from having a single platform to having platforms that our non-profits use, where we've deployed the software for them, we've trained them on it. It kind of what we've observed doing that is it not just changed the ownership of the platform, but it also changed how easy it became for them to modify it and govern it. That kind of became a guiding principle in terms of how we approach technology. Um, we went one step further going forward, which is any platform that we build, it should any platform we build should allow for the primary stakeholders, which is first mile actors, to get more agency. Any tool, any platform that we build where agency is taken away, it does not come into what we build. That became a fundamental driver for us, and I'll talk about three different ones here. Um, all of our platforms largely do three things. One is it helps them get knowledge, learn, get knowledge, get resources. These are done in multiple ways. One is a version of our learning management system. Another is called virtual training platforms, which is from IECO. It's another open source a model that's been pioneered in the. Instead of letting experts travel to local places, you 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 make the expertise accessible to local communities. Every 15 days or every 7 days you have a meeting in which a case is discussed and local communities get to discuss the kind of issues that they're solving, and this become like a fundamental shift in how information and knowledge becomes democratized in this space, right? So one is knowledge, second is data. This is something that we've struggled with. We're in our third version of creating a platform here where any data that we collect, people who collect them should not just be mere enumerators. If they collect and they don't get to govern it or own it or find value in it, it becomes an exercise for the state or for a CSR or for a non-profit to show it in their books that, hey, this is the data point we've collected. So our data platform efforts have also been where the person who collects data points are also able to understand what the data point is and are able to work on it. This is where the common pool resource thing comes into play, right? If I am collecting data about the three wells in my village, I should be able to make a water budget. I should
I should be able to make a plan and then build on it and then get funds for it, instead of me just collecting data points and then it going to a 2 levels higher, which is a district or a block, and then getting decided that okay, this village is water insecure, so we will give funds for it, right? If you're allowing the community to understand their own groundwater resources, you're giving them agency to act on it, whether it is coming from an entitlement from a scheme or whether it's a collective that the village gets to work on. And that becomes very important for us because data is kind of power. I have a few points here. One of the things that it also allows for is, if you're collecting data and you hold it, it is allowing for you to contest the data that the state has on your water body. And that's a fundamental shift that we have seen in a few places, and we want to see that going forward. So I talked about data and I talked about knowledge. Another thing that in this space we lack is um, people and the presence of people on these platforms. Every training that a state or a department does, let's say they've a new program has started and they've trained a few people in Karnataka. If they've trained them this year, 2 years later a new department or a new program comes and they train them, probably 40% of them all over again, right? So there's no way for community resource persons to showcase that they have been trained on these things, they have attended trainings, they've been part of workshops, and they have delivered such set of outcomes over different periods, independent of what NGO or what state program they are on, right? So we're trying to look at how do we build a registry. One is a data registry, one is a knowledge registry, and the third is also people registry, where folks like us, we have LinkedIn and Google and other places where we can showcase our work, right? A resume of sorts. How can we create a space like that for community resource persons? That's another thing that we're working on.
Thank you, Sreechand, for those for your sharing your experiences with Arghyam. And we now go on to Subrata, who has been looking at the commons, not from a digital commons point of view alone, but from the earlier work in the area of water commons and land commons. So I invite Subrata to speak.
Thank you, Guru. So nice to be there in this platform discussing issues around commoning of technology, and an important we have been part, and cooperatives actually. We are part of, as Foundation for Ecological Security, we are part of the larger ecosystem of this cooperative movement, be it NDDB or AMUL, and we initiated as a pilot project of the National Dairy Development Board, and the initial experiment was something what was called the National Tree Growers Cooperative Federation, working at scale on cooperatives for improving natural resources across different villages. And this is something that I just wanted to bring in this aspect, because this has been a very costly experiment for us when we started as uh, having cooperatives for natural resources, and be it common lands or common water resources. And just the initial bit, mainly because the structure of cooperatives in India, and especially the legal aspects and expectations of cooperatives, are totally were a mismatch for common resources, be it land resources or water resources, mainly from the perspective of, say, being voluntary membership. It left out most of the people who are poorer communities never got into the cooperative fold, and this was alienating the people who were actually using these resources. And therefore, say 10 years later, around 1996, we actually started beginning to understand these issues, and move away from cooperatives, not because the cooperatives were not not an effective organization, but it worked largely for individuals who had individual products which came, where they collectively brought in collectively, processed and marketed for better benefits for the individuals as well as for the institution. But in case of cooperative, in case of common lands and water resources, what we understood was what uh, the principles of cooperatives. What we wanted was cooperation. What we wanted was member-controlled institutions. What we wanted was that the benefits go back to the households who are uh, necessarily using it. So what we tried was using each of these principles of cooperatives in institutions which were not registered as cooperatives to take forward. Um, the second thing is if you look at the cooperative model in India, largely what is looked at is what is the profit that the cooperatives are getting. But in case of the work that we were doing, it was largely being uh, if if you are having fuel wood, you are actually distributing it within communities. You are actually not converting it to cash and putting and selling it outside. And therefore, this kind of model of cooperatives is not something that is expected in the Indian cooperative framework. And that is something that is an important aspect, which also led us to look at different models for working with the principles of cooperation intact. The second aspect that I would like to bring in is the aspect of technology and the work around this commons. Also, what we understand uh, is something that requires a lot of understanding from data point of view, from the geospatial information point of view, how it can inform communities and how communities can work based on this information. And therefore, what we created is a platform called India Observatory, and it has a lot of along with that, it has a lot of tools that help communities in planning as well as taking their work forward. And what Sreechand shared is most of it is something that we are working together as Arghyam and FES in developing platforms both for capacity building as well as tools which help the first mile in undertaking their work better. In the process, what we are also seeing is a creation of a lot of public assets, which public digital assets. And an important part that we are presently engaged with is to look at a framework on how this public digital assets are to be managed and governed. As it emerges, how are these assets that we need to see. But what we feel is how the community that is generating this data, generating this information, is in control of this information, and it is not about the information being available to the larger public. They need to understand how much information they need it for themselves, how much they can share, and how much it can be made available for the rest. It An important aspect again is in what form and how it should be made available is another point that we need. And this is an engagement that is in progress, and I would say we are not yet at a stage where we can say this is something that works or does not work. But I think it is a collective journey that we need to take, and these discussions in platforms like this is quite helpful.
Thank you, Subrata. Sujith has been engaging with platform infrastructure in his work, and he'll talk about that. You have slides, I think, right?
Yeah, so good morning again. So I represent an organization called FIDE, a Foundation for Interoperability in Digital Economy. And our work in digital commons has got to do with design, more of design as digital commons, more than building softwares. So our endeavor has been to build some open specifications. And we focus on a lot about how do design, technology design influences not just the larger digital economy, but how does it influence the power structure and consumer behavior and the psyche of mind, and how do they influence all that. So that's broadly the intersection where we think how do we think about designing digital systems becomes important. And the specific area where we worked on is to create these open standards for specifications called the Beckn protocol, which is largely looking at how digital markets have come to be on internet, and how do they therefore influence many things that we're talking about today. So our thesis has been that probably world needs more better protocols before we think about platforms. And the premise being very simple, because by the very nature of design, especially if you talk about platforms as marketplaces, they introduce substantial systemic risk, the effects of which are significantly obvious today. And there are a few risks that I thought I can spend some time about talking today, and therefore is there, maybe participate on a discussion to see is there an alternative technology response to what seems to be a technology introduced problem. So far for talking about platform marketplaces in general, I think the one clear systemic risk it brings by the very nature of its design, if you look at any online marketplace, whether it's from commerce to mobility, even some of the marketplaces in healthcare, agriculture, education, it introduces this situation which I call the double coincidence of presence, where it essentially says both the consumer and provider need to be on the same platform. Yeah, unless you both are not on the platform, and therefore it creates a need for an intermediary to make them come together, build this little sophisticated infrastructure of a marketplace platform, and then let the consumer and provider interact and exchange value. Now, I don't know if that's how marketplaces were pre-digital. I thought marketplaces were this fluidic, open flow of value where consumers and providers are finding each other naturally without having this constraint. And the value comes in from all angles. It's not just one consumer, one provider solving for how do I bring the agriculture produce to a local market. Somebody is solving for getting the tractor, somebody is solving for a tractor mechanic to be available, somebody is offering for cash and finance to be available around the market of food. So market is fluidic. It's an organism that grows, evolves organically, where there is rich flow of value. But when you introduce this risk of somebody having to create and orchestrate a platform where the consumer and provider are sort of brought into this, what you're seeing is the switch from flow of value to store of value. I know Sreechand spoke about data. What happens is you have this market player intermediary trying to say, I control how you interact, how I control and decide how the flow happens between a consumer and provider. And therefore, more than an exchange and flow of value, you're creating a store of value. And therefore, there are these extraction imperatives coming saying, how can my incentives as an intermediary for extracting that value for myself, kind of introduces this whole political economy on the lopsided political economy on the platform. So therefore, one of the questions we asked is how do we sort of mitigate the systemic risk? And for that, we didn't have to really think of any radical new design. We just went back old school to the very design of internet itself. Internet, as you all know, created this network of networks, which is open, egalitarian. It's unfortunate that while internet is open, that economy on internet is not so open anymore. But the internet by design itself allowed for flow of value. It was a flow of information. Anybody can set up a website. Anybody can access through any software to find the website. There was no intermediary. It's one of the most counterintuitive, anachronistic design of our time because it was fundamentally decentralized. There was no central intermediary setting up that infrastructure. And the same thing worked for emails too. Ever since the first email was sent in 71, I, as a sender of an email, need not be on the same platform as the receiver of the email is. Like I could be on, say, whatever, Hotmail, and somebody could be on Yahoo, and we can exchange emails, and there's no intermediary there. If you look at most of the internet systems or some of the civilization scale technology systems, they are actually, if you think about it, do not have a central intermediary. And same goes with a mobile phone technology. I could be on an Airtel operator and somebody could be on Vodafone or AT&T, and we can still exchange calls. We don't have to be on the same sort of the operator network to be talking to each other. So the question was then, why are markets, online marketplaces, take a departure from this model and create a need for somebody to be there as an intermediary to set it up? I think that was probably where we started abdicating this concept of interoperability, which I think is fundamental. Our languages are interoperable. If you don't have a common dictionary, probably my English would be very different from what your English would be. So fundamentally commons, essential aspect of interoperability is something that we stress. And that is where we realized, what is the form of technology, A, that introduces this openness, that does not extract power, but sort of emits power, empowers the consumer and provider, no matter if it's healthcare, agriculture, or taxi driver. So how do we do that? And that's where design of Beckn protocol as a peer-to-peer open economic transaction protocol, any value exchange between a consumer provider, that's where Beckn comes in. I know I'm out of time, but there are 2-3 examples I can talk about. Is today we have taxi drivers auto rickshaw drivers, the three-wheelers in Bangalore, not being having to or on infrastructure where they get rides directly from the consumers, and there's no intermediary, no Uber, Ola in between. 100% of revenue comes to them. They set the price. They decide the rules on how they want to be online or not. We are doing that at some scale in India across with initiatives like Open Network for Digital Commerce. We have a network live in Belém in Brazil, in one of the Amazon biomes, where we have skilling network. How do we make education accessible beyond schools? That's one of the networks. When we're working with some of the agri-entrepreneurs, we just early start with an initiative called Kuza in Kenya. Again, thinking open networks and not platforms. So that was the message I thought I'll leave you guys all with. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zai. I invite Zai Vipra, who will look at this issue from a slightly different lens of that of a researcher, and therefore maybe a broader canvas to the ideas that other speakers have been talking about.
Thanks, Guru. I think, what I'm about to speak will tie in hopefully pretty well with what everyone else has already said. I think that I'll speak first about the context of digital public infrastructure and then a little bit about the economics of it, just to make sense of all the solutions that are now cropping up. So I think it's important to recognize that DPI has been a response to the unilateral privatization of some digital infrastructure. So, you should always, I think, understand it as a response to some harms caused by the privatization of such infrastructure, and then therefore assess it in the sense of how many of these harms does it address, and does it create new harms, and if it does, how can we address those new harms that are created. I also think that whether explicitly or not, DPI recognizes that there are fractures within the interests of capital itself. So, an intervention like ONDC that Sujith was talking about, in its practice recognizes that there is a fracture in the interests of a large platform and smaller platforms, or a platform itself, a platform marketplace, and the traders that operate on that platform marketplace. So there are fractures, there are even fractures within international capital and domestic capital. So I think that a case-by-case analysis needs to be made anytime you're thinking of whether a DPI is appropriate in the situation, of what is the actual fracture that you are situating yourself in, and how you can situate yourself in that fracture to further the public interest. It can be one more than the other, even if there are multiple fractures. The second thing, on the economics of platforms or digital public infrastructure, is that one of the reasons that DPIs have been proposed is because there is a centralizing tendency in platforms. So, multi-sided markets, we know, have a tendency to centralize because of network effects, data, and so on. And if the solution is going to be central, if you're going to get so many efficiency gains through centralization, a lot of people think that the solution or the central solution might as well be public or run through a commons approach at least. But I think even within centralization, I think we need to ask a couple of questions. One, if that centralization is truly necessary, in that is it actually leading to efficiency gains in general, like in a very narrow sense, is it actually efficient, or is this just something that ended up happening and we ascribe efficiency to it? So I think, like, because I'm an AI policy researcher and right now a lot of my examples are going to be that within AI, I think it's becoming clearer that uh, if you have a large language model, the largeness is actually a determinant of the quality of the model, the capabilities, what it can do, and so on. So in that sense, it seems as if the centralization might be necessary, but it's still by no means a settled question. Um, the second question, I think, in terms of centralization that we need to ask is, even if it is narrowly efficient, does this centralization serve the public interest, even if it was publicly owned centralization? So within AI, the larger question is, do we really need large language models? Is this the kind of AI that society will actually truly benefit from, and are we actually ready for them? Or is there another approach that governments need to encourage and allow for, that is not so centralizing, or that has different technological incentives? Then the third, I think, question that we need to ask is, after we've answered the first two questions, let's say centralization is important, and in this way, um, that means then we have to ask which parts of the stack of that technology need to then be publicly owned or controlled. And that's how you start constructing your DPI. And I think with AI, for instance, it's becoming clearer that maybe the actual physical material infrastructure, like computational resources, the GPUs, the servers, and so on, might in fact qualify for a sort of DPI in itself, because uh, the market for that infrastructure itself is so concentrated. There seems to be an inherent centralizing tendency. There might not be, in that a lot of it is just IP and so on, but there just seems to be that you need a lot of compute, and the market for compute is so concentrated. And if we might start seeing uh, the DPIization of actual physical infrastructure, like compute. But unless you have answered the first two questions about centralization and whether it is necessary narrowly and broadly, I think that public investments need to be quite circumspect. You don't need to uh, go ahead and make the investment without answering those questions, because even with compute, even if you're not publicly setting up, a large a semiconductor manufacturing unit, or like a data center, even the provision of land, of subsidies, of the allowing of environmental impact, these are also public investments. So I think that, I think you need to think very closely about what this means for the public interest and what the costs and benefits are, before designating something as necessary for being DPI. But again, we need to keep going back to the concept, the context of DPI being a response to harms. So not setting up a DPI is also a choice, in that you're saying that some of these harms are acceptable until we find a better solution.
So my question was actually for Sujith. Thank you for your presentation. And I mean, the question was also coming a little bit from the conversations we were having yesterday about how we're trying to build tech that's decentralized, but then there is also that very human question of, okay, just making sure that the people who are interacting with this tech still have the agency. How are they being told about what this tech is, and so on. So since you also spoke about how the Beckn protocol is being used, the rideshare platform being one, I was just curious that like what setup is followed. Does like the Beckn team, so to speak, exit that process, and then the drivers themselves somehow come in and manage the platform bit of it, or is there still like some tech intermediary support needed? Because then it creates the question of, you know, they have to really be careful about not becoming managers or so on. I was wondering if what the thought process is about that and how you interact with the users of this tech. Yeah.
This is actually a related question for Sreechand. You mentioned that it was easier to get local groups to modify and build on top of the existing design. So I'd really like to hear a bit more about that.
Unfortunately, my question is also to Sujith only. So I've been trying to understand the Beckn protocol for some time, and the peer-to-peer protocol which you're talking about, decentralized models. So I'm just wondering about the data part of it. Yeah. Like even for peer-to-peer models, like if like an auto driver is booking an app, the data which is generated, is that like owned by the entire network of commons, or do we need some centralization there? And there's a follow-up to this on a policy level, like when we are thinking in terms of data. So in terms of database management, there's a common terminology which we use for permission metrics. There's a CRUD terminology. So which basically just stands for create, read, update, and delete permissions. So can we just make the read part, I mean, as decentralized in a common, or as a policy level, wherever there is big data involved, can we just make the read part public? Or, I mean, as a policy, it can, if it can be done. And that can be answered by any of the panelists.
So I think I'll take both the questions together. I think a bit more context for what we're talking about on the ride hailing as an example. So this is an initiative called Namayatri in Bangalore. For those who are not aware, probably namayatri.in, NAMMAYATRA.in. You'll also find a lot of open data dashboards, and I'll come to the open data part in a bit. But I think if you talk about Beckn protocol and the emergent open market, protocol by itself is not, there's no runtime, it's a specification. And the thing about platforms, the thing about any digital commons is for us to take any utility out of digital, you need to have software on the top, the application platform on top. So the question is, while fine there is a specification, who builds the applications on top of it? Now the thinking there is, that's a choice we have. Anybody can build an application. It can be a not-for-profit, for-profit, small company, big company. But what the design does, it solves for things that people thought only the software as a single monolithic stack, as a central intermediary led. We're changing that conversation. We are saying today, if the argument is saying that if I want to give farmers or taxi drivers access to the market, it means that I have to solve for the demand, bringing consumers onto the platform, getting the whole our supply on platform, and solving for logistics, and then dispute resolution, payments, and whole bunch of things that makes the whole thing functional. We are saying that part can be broken down, each part being done by somebody else on the network rather than all being done by one person. So now it allows for choices to say who does that. Nobody is constrained by using one person to solve for all these functions. They can all come from multiple places. So that's the first thing that the protocol enables, which means suddenly you have nodes on the network which can solve for each of the problem. Specifically in the case of Namayatri, the conversation started with the taxi drivers reaching out. After they having seen our first sort of demonstration in Kochi, we had the first Beckn protocol implementation in the form of Kochi Open Mobility. So the drivers reached out and said, because they're living the problem, they intuitively understood the protocol. They said, essentially you're saying, I have agency to set my own price. I have agency to bring my asset, my ride and my time available to be for any consumer without having to depend on somebody setting the rules. That's something they intuitively understood. The question is, there's still a skill or capacity gap of actually building the software. Now, they could have gone to anybody to build that software. They chose to go with a company which believes in their vision, a company that was doing financial services. They said, I can help you build the software. The good part was the design of the software was participatory. It is not member controlled, but member enabled, because the other company was for profit. But it's definitely a possibility to have somebody do it in a digital commons way. By the way, that particular software that got built is open source. It's available for anybody to reuse it anywhere else without having to talk to that company. Now they came together, build this up, and then saying, if I can solve for you coming online, and then the network solves for bringing the rights, then we have a solution. Today, just to give you some sense of economics, the entire ride revenue comes to them. And because there's a software and software runs on a compute which comes at a cost, unfortunately, we have to be living with the AWS and Google Maps of the world. They do come at a cost. So right now they charge about 25 rupees for the whole day as a subscription fees for any number of rides. It technically comes down to about 2 to 3 rupees per ride as a fees, not as a commission or as a function of the value that is flowing through. It's a function of the usage of a certain capacity. So that's the shift we are seeing with Namayatri. Now, to your question on data, I know it's a long answer, but your question on data, it is possible to now have a conversation because you're decentralized. There is a consumer node and a supply node. Both are not controlled by the same organization or the same entity. It is possible for them to emit open data. Till now, open data has still been a concept of extracting from transaction platforms and make it available. But by design, because you have an interoperable open protocol, you can naturally emit data. Now, at what level do you want to emit data? We have a dashboard on the Namayatri website where you can see rides happening as of now in what all areas of Bangalore and also the cumulative set of rides. Now, we need to, of course, have a conversation on how much of that data should be a public digital commons, elements of privacy, elements of competitive intelligence and all that. But yes, data itself could be made digital commons in public. And that's one of the underpinning philosophies between Namayatri or an ONDC, and you'll see a lot of that coming. One last point, the data of the driver, which is the driver is actually generating his own agency by accumulating data for itself, like the rating of its service, the ride history. Today, if a driver leaves any of the existing platforms like Uber, you lose that entire data. But with infrastructure like a network with Beckn, you can move your data as your own data to another platform and start from there rather than starting from zero. So this is a situation where the data is working for the person who's actually driving that business rather than the intermediary. So that's one of the critical unlocks, I think, that we are trying to do with some of these initiatives in India. Thank you.
I think we need to talk. There are quite a few things that I can learn and we can do together. Okay, answering Emma's question. So I can give two examples. One is on the data, and second is on one of the first things that I've talked about was when we deployed Open Data Kit at our level, which is 3 degrees separated from the communities we serve. The second and third versions of that, we used Kobo Toolbox, which we've created standard templates, and we had built a shared vocabulary of what are the data points that are the minimum ones that all of our partners need to collect. And then we've shared these templates along with the Kobo Toolbox platform to our partners. What it then allowed for is for partners to deploy their own instances, having lat long and boundaries as the common data points. That allowed for them to collect specific data for their communities, which we don't have access to. And if the lat long and the few other data points that we have collectively agreed on allows for us to then do aggregate level intelligence on that, right? The second one is the learning platform that we built. The first one that we've built, we took a large MOOC, large LMS, and we looked at, okay, these are the ideals that this platform should abide by. It should allow for everyone to create content that allows for any other partner to make version 2 and version 3 of it. Very quickly, we realized that what we needed was translations rather than versioning of these content that they created. So then we added translations functions for it that allowed for one nonprofit in Anand, Gujarat, to translate content that was developed by an organization in Hyderabad. Right. Second layer that came after that was, instead of having them to author content on the platform, what we did was we only told them you can upload content on the platform. So it took away even more compute heavy resources on the central platform. Upload PDFs and then you can start delivering them wherever you want. Both of them have certain trade-offs, because if you're creating on the platform, that allows for larger dispersal, but when we take that out of it, it relies on offline networks for sourcing of content. And I think the trade-offs we've taken were our offline networks were strong enough in how content was shared, but in other spaces, your mileage might vary.